What happens when you hire a bodyguard and he starts testifying under oath against the very story he was hired to protect? This is not a normal confirmation hearing. This is a stress test of loyalty, under oath, under pressure, and under the full weight of federal law. 2 weeks into his second term, Donald Trump had already pushed 8 cabinet nominees through. But the real story isn't who got confirmed, it's who had to answer questions, and one name changed everything: Kash Patel. Because Kash Patel was not supposed to hesitate, he was chosen for a reason: a former federal prosecutor, a loyal defender, a man who publicly vowed to dismantle what he called the deep state, a man who said the system was rigged and that he would fight back. But then came the question, January 6th, pardons, violence, no hypotheticals, no escape routes. Just a direct line between what Donald Trump had promised and what Kash Patel was willing to say under oath. And Patel said it, clearly, calmly, and on the record. He does not support pardons for those who committed violence against law enforcement. That single sentence did more than answer a question. It broke alignment. It split narrative from testimony. And more importantly, it exposed something deeper. What people say in public is one thing. What they say under oath is something else entirely. Because here's the part no one can spin. Under oath, words are no longer messaging. They are liability. And Kash Patel knows that. He's been on both sides of that table. He understands what a statement becomes once it's entered into the record, time-stamped, transcribed, and preserved as potential evidence. So when senators pressed him again and again on January 6th on pardons, on accountability, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Because what Patel did not say matters just as much as what he did. He did not echo Donald Trump's language. He did not call those defendants patriots. He did not suggest they were wrongly prosecuted. He did not commit to any future clemency. That silence is not neutral. That silence is distance. Now put the timeline together. January 6th, 2021, violence at the Capitol, assaults on law enforcement, hundreds of prosecutions. Fast forward to January 2025, confirmation hearing, sworn testimony, direct questioning. And in between, years of public statements from Donald Trump promising pardons, framing those events as political persecution. Those two tracks cannot run in parallel forever. Eventually they intersect. And when they do, someone has to choose which version survives legal scrutiny. This is where the logic tightens. If Patel fully aligns with Trump's narrative, he risks contradicting established facts and exposing himself to legal consequences. If he aligns with the record, violence occurred, law enforcement was attacked, he creates a direct contradiction with the political narrative that elevated him. That's not a communications problem. That's a structural fracture. And fractures like that don't stay contained. They spread, they widen, and they force everyone watching to ask the same question. If even the nominee for FBI director won't repeat the claim under oath, what does that say about the claim itself? And this is exactly where the pressure stops being theoretical and starts becoming personal. Because once testimony is on the record, it doesn't just sit there. It gets compared, cross-referenced, challenged, and if necessary, used. So now ask the next logical question. What else does Kash Patel know, and what happens if he's asked about it under oath again? Because Patel wasn't an outsider. He was inside the system, inside the conversations, inside the decision-making loops during some of the most controversial moments of Donald Trump's first term. That matters, because prosecutors don't just look at what you say. They look at what you can say. They map proximity. They map access. They map exposure. And Patel checks every box. Now layer in another date, April 1st, the firing of Pam Bondi, not before the hearings, not after things settled, right in the middle of escalation, while testimony was still unfolding, while pressure was still building. Timing like that doesn't exist in a vacuum. Because when someone removes a top legal buffer in the middle of overlapping legal and political stress, investigators don't ask why now casually. They ask it systematically. They look at motive, sequence, and effect. Was it about performance? Or was it about control? About replacing unpredictability with compliance? And here's where the pattern stops being coincidental and starts becoming evidentiary. We've seen this sequence before. Michael Cohen, once loyal, then cooperative. Alan Weisselberg, once silent, then pleading guilty. Different roles, different moments, same trajectory. Loyalty holds until exposure rises. This isn't speculation. This is behavioral patterning under legal stress. When individuals face the possibility of personal liability, criminal, financial, reputational, the calculation changes. Not ideologically, not emotionally, practically. Survival overrides alignment. And that's the contradiction at the center of this entire structure. A system built on personal loyalty is being tested inside a framework that rewards legal self-preservation. Those two forces do not coexist peacefully. One eventually overrides the other. So when Patel steps back, even slightly, from the most legally vulnerable positions, that's not hesitation. That's calibration. That's someone who understands exactly where the legal line is and refuses to cross it blindly. Which brings us to the real fracture point. Because Donald Trump's strategy has always relied on controlling the narrative, through messaging, through personnel, through repetition, but under oath, narrative control disappears. There is no spin, there is no reframe, there is only the record. And the record is starting to diverge. On one side, public statements, rallies, promises of pardons, language of patriots. On the other, sworn testimony acknowledging violence, refusing blanket clemency, avoiding alignment with those claims. Those two versions cannot both hold legal weight. So the question is no longer whether loyalty is cracking. The question is what happens when enough of these moments accumulate, when enough insiders choose precision over protection, record over rhetoric. Because at that point, this stops being about one nominee, one hearing, one statement. It becomes a test of the system itself. And that is the moment this stops being about personalities and starts becoming about consequences you can actually see. Because behind every abstract phrase, pardon, violence, accountability, there are real people. Capitol police officers who were assaulted on January 6, 2021, investigators who built cases file by file, hour by hour, a public that was told two completely different versions of the same day, and is now watching those versions collide under oath. So when Kash Patel refuses to endorse blanket pardons for violent offenders, that is not just a legal distinction. That is a line drawn between rhetoric and reality, between calling something a political narrative and admitting it meets the threshold of criminal conduct. And when that line is drawn inside a confirmation hearing under penalty of perjury, it carries weight far beyond that room. Because here's the core issue. If the law only applies when it's convenient, then it doesn't apply at all. If someone can publicly promise one thing and privately concede another under oath, then the system isn't being tested, it's being exposed. And if even a hand-picked nominee will not repeat the claim when the legal stakes are real, then the claim itself collapses under its own weight. This is not about Democrats versus Republicans. This is about whether the same standard applies when power is on the line, whether testimony still means truth, whether the system still holds. So ask yourself this: if the person chosen to lead the FBI won't defend the narrative when it matters most, who will? And if you believe moments like this matter, where the record starts to diverge from the rhetoric, hit like, share this breakdown, and subscribe for more analysis that doesn't just follow the story, but tracks the evidence as it unfolds.